you get one of two reactions. People are like, whoa, that's cool, or people are like, what is that? This is so much fun. It really lives up to the reputation it has. I like the shoe. I like the shoe. Hi everyone, I'm Kennan from Cars and Bids, and today we're discussing one of the most unusual and rarest modern BMWs, and that of course is this, the BMW M Coupe, better known as the clown shoe. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing all of its facts and figures. First, we'll talk about its history and where it fits into BMW's past. Then we'll get nerdy and talk about some of the technical details. And then we'll do what I've always wanted to do with one of these and take it for a drive. Before we get going, as you might expect, this clown shoe is currently for sale, being auctioned live on, you guessed it, Cars and Bids. This is a 2000 M Coupe, which means it comes with the venerable S52 inline-6 engine. It also has a 5-speed manual transmission, as all of these did, and this one is largely unmodified, which is kind of a rare sight these days. And after you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below where you can head to the live auction of this one, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. And we begin the story of the M Coupe by talking about its convertible relative, the Z3. In the 1990s, BMW realized that there was a segment that liked the idea of a two-seater convertible sports car with a front engine configuration, because the Miata was incredibly popular. But they also realized that there was a segment that wanted a more premium car compared to the Miata, and so they introduced the Z3, and they would go on to produce a performance M variant of it, which received a number of special touches, including the S52 inline-6 at the front and quad exhaust at the rear and suspension enhancements to make it a sports car. However, engineers were never really fully satisfied with that car, as being a convertible, it wasn't particularly stiff. The chassis had a lot of flex to it. And so in their spare time, they took a prototype convertible Z3 and added a metal roof to it. And then they pitched this idea to the BMW executives. Now, the BMW executives were a little bit on edge about producing a car like this, as they didn't really want it to cost more than the Z3. They were really concerned about development costs. But BMW engineers promised, because that car would share a lot of components with the standard Z3 and already existing Z3Ms, and other components from other BMWs, they could make it cost effective. And so BMW put it on sale alongside the M Roadster. It should also be noted that BMW would make a non-M version of the coupe as well. So you had standard Z3 convertible and coupe models, and then you would also have M Roadster and coupe variants. During this time, however, BMW was still producing the E36 generation M3, and they didn't want this new M Coupe competing with that car in any way, because this car would share the same engine and transmission with that car, but it weighed a lot less, and so they would go out of their way to make sure this car was handicapped compared to the almighty M3. The main way BMW avoided competition within the same household was that they didn't put a lot of marketing value behind the M Coupe. They focused on marketing the M3. But despite this, they still would update the M Coupe throughout its life. When the new E46 generation M3 came out, they would update the engine in this car to the S54 found in that one. But again, they made sure to handicap it in a couple of different ways. They made sure that engine made slightly less power than the E46 M3. They made sure that the M Coupe would retain a 5-speed manual transmission instead of the 6 speeds found in the M3. And they made sure that the E46 M3 had a more aggressive differential compared to that found in the M Coupe. All of these elements, coupled with its love it or hate it looks, meant that the M Coupe was never really a huge success here in the United States. BMW would only produce 2,858 examples for America, making it one of the most rare and unusual BMWs to date. But with those who really love this car, it remains one of the most interesting and desirable BMWs produced during that time. All right, it is time to get nerdy, and we are going to begin with the most iconic, interesting, controversial part of the M Coupe, and that, of course, is the way it looks. It's called a clown shoe because, well, it resembles a clown shoe, and it is an unusual looking car, but it's all done with purpose, and its main focus is chassis stiffness. By adding a roof to this car and doing away with the convertible mechanism, this car increased its structural rigidity 2.6 times that over the Roadster variant. As a result, at the time, this was the stiffest chassis you could buy from BMW. But the benefits of the roof don't end with chassis stiffness. You also gained a lot of practicality because now you had a large storage area to put things. You didn't have just a trunk due to the mechanical mechanism of the top. You now had a huge area where you could put your stuff. And so this car became slightly more practical compared to the Roadster variant. But adding a roof wasn't the only thing that BMW wanted to mess with the M Coupe. They also wanted to play with the suspension geometry, and they did so with this car, so much so that it actually added half an inch to the wheelbase of the M Coupe. But in the name of cost savings, a lot of the components were shared or reused from other BMWs. Up front, basically the entire front end of this car is interchangeable with the M Roadster, from body panels to suspension components. But in the rear, BMW chose to use components from the E30, and they would use a trailing arm design for the rear suspension components. Now, what does that mean? Well, a trailing arm is effectively an arm where the shock and spring are fixed to it separately. They're not one single unit. The benefit of this is that you can tune them individually, but it also allows the wheel to articulate more. The benefit of that being is that when you're driving along and you hit a bump, it allows the wheel to undulate and settle back down, meaning you can drive through rough surfaces without upsetting the handling of the car. And that's especially beneficial in a sports car like this. And speaking of shared components, we now climb under the long hood of the M Coupe to discuss one of its larger ones, and that would be its engine. Now, which engine you have in your M Coupe really breaks it into one of three different generations. Under the hood of this one, we have the S52 inline-six that was shared with the E36 M3. That's considered to be the first generation or first version of the M Coupe. The second version would be the Euro-spec S50 engine, which, just like the E36 M3, the European version received a more powerful, more exotic engine, and you'll find that in European M Coupes. And then there's the S54, which was shared between both US spec and European M Coupes. So S52 powered cars, S50 powered cars, and S54 powered cars. Now the engine in this, the S52, as I said, was shared with the E36 M3. It displaces 3.2 liters and it produces 240 horsepower and 236 foot-pounds of torque. That's down on the 314 horsepower that the Euro-spec engine made, but there are benefits to this engine as it's, well, a lot more simple compared to that one. This engine only has single vanos on the intake cam as opposed to dual vanos on the intake and exhaust like the European version. It also has one throttle body as opposed to 6 individual throttle bodies, which is a benefit because on the European engines, they're known to be relatively finicky to set up and synchronize. This engine also, unlike the S54, doesn't require valve adjustments, and it doesn't require replacement of things like the rod bearings nearly as frequently or upgrading the Vanos hub due to failure. And so this engine, although it doesn't make as much power and isn't quite as exotic, is very reliable, and frankly, that's a benefit to a lot of people these days. And now it's time to move inside the M Coupe, and it's immediately clear that there are a lot of shared components in here. One of them would be the air vents that are clearly from a BMW E30, the window switches, which are clearly from an E36, the steering wheel, which is from the E36 M3, and some other components. It's just very obvious there's a lot of part sharing going on, which isn't a complaint, merely an observation. But one of the bigger things that was shared in here would be the 5-speed manual transmission. Now, as I mentioned, all versions of the M Coupe got a 5-speed manual, even the European ones. Although the European E36 M3 would get a 6-speed, and obviously the E46 M3 would as well, the M Coupe always had a 5-speed manual transmission by design so that the car couldn't really keep up with the E46 M3 or the European E36 M3. However, despite this, the M Coupe certainly wasn't slow. This version, the S52 powered version, could do 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds. The European engined car could do 0 to 60 in 5.1, and the S54 powered car could do 0 to 60 in 4.8. And although those aren't mind-bending times today, for its era, this car was still pretty fast, and more importantly, because of its low curb weight, about 3,100 pounds, this car was extremely fun to drive. It's time to drive the clown shoe. It's very cool. I've always wanted to drive one of these. I owned an E36 M3 previously, and I've always been fascinated by these cars because I think they're just so quirky and wild. It is a fun experience right away. Now, I personally like the S52 engine a lot. I think it makes nice torque, and if you prefer not to necessarily, strangle your engine like you have to at the S54, really take it all the way up the rev band. It's a, the S52 is a more than capable engine. But this car is just like, it's just so cool. It's just so odd looking. And people look at it like, you get one of two reactions. People are like, whoa, that's cool. Or people are like, what is that? In a very a judgy way, I would say. But when enthusiasts see this car, like when I see one out and about, I'm like, oh my God, it's a shoe. I can't believe it. I also am a big fan of the S52 clown shoes, as they're a lot more affordable than the S54, and I don't think you lose all that much. Granted, you are down a pretty decent amount in horsepower, but nonetheless, I don't really feel like you're losing that much given the price differential between the two. Especially because, when you drop it a cog and you take off, it's not exactly slow. Like, it gets up and moves, and it's very enjoyable because, again, this car doesn't weigh a lot. It's a very lightweight driving experience, and it's a very cool one at that, because it's just so unique looking. Additionally, on the way that it drives, you're right on the rear wheels because your seats are very far back in this car. And so you feel it like squat, and it kind of like pivots around your hips, which is cool. I can't go too fast right now because I'm on Mercer Island here in Washington, and it's very tight around here. Kids are getting dropped off from school, so I don't want to freak anybody out. But nonetheless, like, this car is, you can tell it's just a blast, and it's just and it handles really well. And that was what BMW, I think, always feared, was if they gave this car too much power, then it would outhandle and outshine the M3. And they didn't want to do that. That was their cash cow. So they didn't want to upstage the almighty. But this car looking the way it does, I think it was kind of inevitable, even if BMW did try to hold it back from being as good as it could be. Oh yeah. Oh, the turn-in is so lovely. Man, that turn-in is fantastic. It's so good. Oh, how lovely. So let's break it down a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the steering. So this car is from the 90s, and so the steering on center has a pretty decent amount of play, I would say. But nonetheless, it is very accurate. I seem to remember my E36, which had a Z3 steering rack, that felt more direct to me, but I was running a square setup of wheels, so that's probably why. But nonetheless, it's like, it definitely is, it's weighted nicely, I would say, and you can feel it alter the pitch of the car pretty quickly. Then again, there's the engine. I think that, I'm cruising at 2,000, I lay into it, like, it's got enough torque that it kind of hauls off, so it's quite good at that. So I like the S52. Whether you like it or dislike it is totally up to your preference, but I think it's a very competent, capable engine. Then there's the transmission. So the 5-speed gearbox in this, as found in all versions of the M Coupe, it's certainly a long throw between gears, but that said, it's a robust transmission. It's also pretty refined for what it is. Yeah, of course, like, wish it had a 6th gear, but nonetheless, it's fun to use, it's reliable, it's robust. Frankly, it's a manual transmission, which is, I will worship at the altar of the manual transmission. I just think they are the greatest. Then there are the chassis dynamics overall. One quick squirt while I've got a chance there. The chassis on this car, the turn-in is so great, and you can really plant this car very well. Yes, it's got a very long nose, but I'm like stunned at how nicely it turns in, and also how small the car is. I'm having fun on relatively narrow roads, not having to overstep my lane, because this car is so narrow. I love that about it. And there's a seat of the pants feeling I kind of get with this car that I really enjoy. Obviously, it's incredibly analog in here. It's throttle by cable. The cruise control is old school in that way. I really like it. Visibility is good too. And of course, you have extra capacity to carry stuff, which I think is great. Now, I've personally many times considered getting one of these. I was always worried that the build quality would be too E36 for me. That was the thing that bothered me the most about that car, and that's what bothers most people. But honestly, like, it's of that generation, but this one doesn't like squeak and rattle anywhere near as much as my E36 M3 did. That said, this one's not perfect. You know, the known flaws section, you know, will disclose the flaws with this car, and it's certainly not perfect. It is still very much a nice condition driver example of one of these cars. The dealer that's selling it told me that the previous owner used it as his daily driver. And I think that's so legit, daily driving a clown shoe. How cool. But yeah, it's a very enjoyable car to drive. So the things I like the most, I like the sizing, I like the chassis, I like the looks personally. I think they look cool as you like, especially with those deeply dished rear wheels. I actually like the engine. The added reliability of it being an S52 is nice. And the punch it has is pretty great. This is a very fun car to drive. I see why people have raved about these for so long. This is so much fun. It really lives up to the reputation it has. I like the shoe. I like the shoe. Woo! So to conclude, if you're looking for a unique, rare car that offers great performance and frankly good value compared to its later siblings, the S52 shoe is one of the cars I would certainly say should be on that list. It's a lot of fun to drive. It's exciting to look at. And if you show up to Cars and Coffee in a clown shoe, you know, there are gonna be people who love it, people who hate it, but as long as you like it and when you drive it, it's going to make you smile. It's a very special car, and I like it a whole heck of a lot more than I was expecting to. Great car. And that is the BMW M Coupe, better known as the clown shoe. This is an incredibly unusual and rare modern BMW, and it touts venerable 6-cylinder power at the front, a manual transmission in the middle, and rear-wheel drive. These cars have gone from kind of ugly ducklings into collectible swans, and well, if you're in the market for one of these, you can bid on this one and buy it only on Cars and Bids. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon. Goodbye.